Okay, it's going to be a video on my critique of the left's critique of the Bank of England raising interest rates. And here, I think I'm just looking at people on the left of the spectrum, and I just don't think they actually understand economics. I think they've missed huge parts of the economic system. They're just focusing. I get this a lot from the left. It's very knee-jerk, like um, like the interest rate rises were coming 2 years ago. Most people that understood economics knew that 2 years' time these interest rates were coming because they understood economics. Now the bank raises them, and the left's like knee-jerk, kind of just so behind the kind of so behind on they're just not on the ball, and I think it's because they just fundamentally don't understand capitalism. Um, you can just blame capitalism at the end of the day if you wanted to. You can't just blame one part of it. And I'm going to go through why I think this. So, yeah, the Bank of England has said it's raising interest rates to tackle inflation, and the critique of that is inflation is a supply side. It's caused by supply side issues, not demand. So the first thing to point out there is that supply and demand are two sides of the same coin. If you have supply issues, you can always lower demand to match supply, don't you? You don't have to fix the supply side. And here, really, what's important to note is the Bank of England only has control of supply of demand in terms because it has control of the supply of money, which affects demand. It doesn't really affect supply. Supply is a political issue. Things like Brexit, international trade, laws around other things, taxes and stuff. The bank can't do anything about it. It can only change the supply of money into the economy, which is something that drives demand. So it's doing the only thing it can do. Blame the government for not fixing the supply issues. And because the government aren't fixing the supply issues, the bank has to step in and reduce demand. So that's really the primary thing where people are going missing, where they're saying it's like a supply-driven inflation, so don't mess with demand. And then also, it's a lie. I mean, the Bank of England is saying it's a lie as well, because everyone just wants to blame Russia for everything. But if you looked before Russia started this war, before they fired the most recent shots and turned it into a full-scale war, inflation was running 4 or 5%, which is well above the 2% target for the Bank of England. So why was it running at 4 or 5% if Russia hadn't even started the war yet? Well, there's this thing that happened called the pandemic, and I know we all like to forget about it now, and that's a kind of response to trauma, I guess, not a healthy response, different manner. But during that period, the central banks of every country printed vast amounts of their currency, vast amounts of it. There is literally a huge amount of extra money sloshing around in the economy. I mean, poor people haven't got any of it, so they're fucked anyway. But there is a lot more money there. It's just been sucked up into the rich again. But the money's there. It's creating inflation because the purchasing power of the pound has weakened. Because there's just more pounds. Again, there's not more pounds in the poor person's wallet, in the benefits claimant's wallet. So they haven't got any more of those pounds. They're getting screwed with the inflation that all those pounds are causing. But as well as the bank just printing all that money for QE and buying government bonds and government giving it back in furlough and government loans and all the rest, they also kept interest rates next to zero, which means you can create debt for no costs. And so you're just creating more money and kept putting more money into the economy. And that is the only thing the bank can really stop. It has to put a brake on the creation of more money. It literally is written into its charter that it will do that when inflation runs. So it's really hard to blame the bank for doing what the politicians set it up to do, and it's written in there. They're going to do it. So yeah, but that kind of creation of cheap debt is totally fueling multiple bubbles. You know, and the primary one here is the housing bubble, because that's the problem here. When people look at interest rates returning to what is a reasonable amount, so an interest rate really should say what is the price of borrowing money, and if it's zero, that's not a functional cost to creating money. There needs to be, certainly in capitalism we live under, there needs to be a functional cost to create money. If the interest rate is zero, then traders just go, right, well, by the time we get hold of the money, it's 1 or 2%. I can make 1 or 2% on the crypto markets or the stock market fluctuations. 1 or 2% isn't too hard to make over the course of a few hours or a day or whatever. So you get all these traders just margin calling loads of stuff, inflating crypto and stock markets, making millions, chucking it back. It's just not good economics. You need to put a barrier on that by increasing the interest rates on borrowing. So, the left arguing for low interest rates is literally arguing for free form capitalism. And we will return actually to how that's causing problems with the housing market. Because first, I want to show how rising interest rates can affect demand and supply. So, let's see. Yeah, so there's basically that's inflation. Half of it is caused by energy prices and the war in Ukraine, and they will go down. Although because somebody blew up the Nord Stream gas pipeline, Russia now will never be able to transport gas into Europe. So European gas prices will go down, but that we're still going to be suffering a large amount of energy inflation, because we're going to have to buy it all off America via shipments. Very expensive. Russia would just funnel its excess to India, China, and North Africa. So yeah, gas prices are going to be coming down, but because somebody, America, I reckon, blew up the Nord Stream gas pipeline, we're not going to see the total benefits of that. Like, saying Russia did that is utterly insane. Like, that was the one piece of leverage Russia had over Europe, supply of gas. It now doesn't have it. It has no leverage. Call Putin insane if you want, but he wouldn't do something like that. He wouldn't take away his own leverage. But well, maybe the person who's now supplying Europe with gas at extortionate prices, maybe they blew it up. Yes, anyway. So, the other problems are, the supply problems, and Brexit, basically, and China not still being under pandemic rules and stuff, creating massive supply issues. But if you allow cheap money to keep running in an economy, then two or three things happen. One, people can start up new businesses easier, because all new businesses start with loans. And if a big part of the problem is a labour shortage, there's already too many vacancies for the labour market to fill, you don't want more businesses. You want less businesses, thus creating the labour sufficient to fill the vacancies. This stops an upward pressure on wages, and wages are key to inflation. I know it's not that popular on the left, but if a company increases its wage bill, it pretty much has to increase its end product sales. I mean, certainly capitalist ones do, because they're not going to take profit from the fucking CEO, are they? So, in our lovely capitalist world that which everyone loves and votes for all the time, if you have higher wages, you have higher inflation. So the Bank of England is, let's kill off new startup businesses. Let's any business which is being kept afloat because of the access to cheap credit, they're going to go down as well. That takes the pressure off the labour market. It's brutal. It's capitalism. Utterly brutal. There we go. The Bank of England is basically saying we would rather recession than constant inflation. That's what they're saying. It's up to the government to try and fix those other problems. And also the notion that when people are saying, so people aren't going to be taking out loans, so they can, before maybe people are taking out loans to buy conservatories or these larger things, or even sofas. People get credit to buy a fucking sofa or a computer. It's all just big things like that. Basically, if you've got a supply issue and you're not getting enough computers and sofas into the country, the last thing you want to do is have a demand that puts pressure on that. You want to cut the demand to match the supply, or else the prices will keep going up. The people who can only bring in 1,000 computers into the country will just up the price, because they're like, right, well, this is a bidding war now. So the bank is trying to stop those bidding wars. Again, supply and demand. They're the two things. You don't split one apart and say, it's just a supply problem. No. So let's also, actually, before we get to house prices, we're going to talk lastly about what the bank is also trying to do. And this is where I think often the left gets a bit too in its own little world, in a little world of Britain, and be like, now interest rates are going up, we're screwed. But the bank is looking at the Federal Reserve of America. And the Federal Reserve of America is putting its interest rates up. And now here, I'm not entirely an economics master myself, but basically, if the Bank of England doesn't put its interest rates up, then there's a greater appeal on the international markets to hold dollars over pounds. So the pound is going to fall in value. Less people want it. Also, with uncontrolled inflation, the purchasing power of the pound is going down, so less people want it. Basically, not trying to match the Federal Reserve's interest rates means the value of the pound will get lower internationally. And obviously it doesn't seem to make a difference for people just buying their chips and everything. But if the pound goes lower, then imports go up. And we are so addicted to imports that increases in the price of imports directly hits inflation. It inflates food. We import most of our food, and a lot of high-tech stuff, computers and stuff like that. There's big holes in our industry that we just import it all. A sliding pound really massively affects inflation. It also means that it takes more money to pay off our debts, and most international debts are in dollars, so our debt payments go up. And then lastly, and I'm not sure why, but a sliding pound totally nails pension funds, and obviously that's something to do with how pension funds function. But you saw when the pound slid earlier, they had a fire sale of the assets just to keep floating, and they want to now sue the government. And maybe this is a terrible way to make sure our elderly people have an income in their later life, but that is how it's set up. So if you want to just destroy all the pension funds and force people who are now 80 back into work, I don't think that's a good idea, for multiple reasons. They'll probably be shit at their job, and it's just putting more pressure on the labour market, and they'll probably die trying. They're too old. Not good moves. So the bank is trying to defend the pound in the international markets. That's what it's doing. And then really, lastly, we're going to come to this. Why really is a higher interest rate a problem? And when you look at the interest rate, 3%, that's actually a functionally decent interest rate. Like I said earlier, it stops people who can get hold of credit just borrowing loads of money and speculating on it, because all they got to do, if interest rates are 1%, all they got to do is make 2%. Well, obviously by the time they get the money from a bank, however, but these bankers have got better access. They don't slap on the percentages themselves. So literally the banks can speculate. The speculating arms of the banks can get that cheap credit, And all they've got to do is turn a 1-2% profit, and they've made money. So they borrow 10 billion, the interest rate is 1%, but if they can spin 2% profit by speculating on Bitcoin or something, then they make money. But that isn't economics, is it? That's not economic activity. That doesn't help us. So you can't allow it. You need to push the interest rates up so that it's just harder to make those speculative profits. So yeah, it's just having a certain amount of interest rates in the capitalist economy is actually good. I mean, obviously we should just move away from this. But, supposedly, even Jeremy Corbyn wasn't even a socialist, and he was a complete evil doer, wasn't he? A terrorist mastermind or something. He wasn't even saying let's have the government control the Bank of England. So he wasn't even a socialist in that degree. So, but yeah, finally we're going to see that basically. So what's the problem in our economy? If we want to return to a reasonable interest rate for our credit and our money creation, the major problem that is going to cause is house prices, isn't it? Mortgages, because mortgages now are is a bubble. Okay, when it happens in the stock market, certainly when it happens in the crypto market, everyone's like bubble, 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 and when it pops, everyone's like, well, you should have known. It was built on fucking sand. But you are literally living in your bubbles now. Bubbles made of bricks and mortar. And it just should be obvious that the main way people pay for their mortgages is by earning a wage. And if wages have not really increased in the last 12 years, but house prices have they've doubled, that's your problem, okay? People's wages now, more and more of their profit is being taken to pay mortgages, and yeah, you up that interest rate and you wipe out even more of their leftover income. So it's house prices, it's not interest rates that's the problem. But look at government policy for the last 12 years. They have done everything in their power to inflate house prices. They've let buy-to-let landlords run riot. Things like the stamp duty holiday in the middle of the pandemic. No one questioned that. They're like, wow, already you can see the housing market is overheating because people want to move the fuck out of their tiny little flats, and they want to get bigger houses. All these other pressures that the pandemic's causing. And our Chancellor, in the middle of it all, goes, oh, let's throw some gasoline on that motherfucker, and takes away the stamp duty tax, which removes, possibly because it was such a frenzy of house buying, 20 billion. It's like 15 to 20 billion from government revenue. And now we're saying now that we've got to fix this fiscal hole of 50 billion. Well, there was 20 billion just pissed up the wall during the pandemic, and all it did was increase house prices. It's a bubble. That's what you call a bubble. That's literally someone going, I'm fucking inflating that motherfucker. People just don't notice it because they live in it. And they think, oh, this is great. My house is going up in value. He's like, yeah, but they're all going up in value. So actually, it's just relative to your wages is more. That's terrible. If that happened to food, you'd starve to death and you'd be rightly rioting. So this is the problem. Government policy and greed, the greed that has been allowed to champion all things in our society, has led to this point. So what people should be arguing for now is a deflation of the housing bubble. But that's almost impossible, because when you start to deflate it, they just pop. Because that's what the rich do. That's what all those buy-to-let landlords will do. All the people who can drop their capital and run will run. And so all you people who have got one house and you bought it in the last 5 years, you're the people who are going to be fucked. Because you can't drop it. You can't drop the baby, can you? You have to stay there. And then you're just into negative equity. You're paying, huge amounts of money on a mortgage that doesn't reflect the value of your home. Fucked. And whose fault was it? It was Rishi Sunak's and the banks. Oh, it was our Prime Minister. He's now our Prime Minister. Unbelievable. That someone who was a banker in the 2008 crisis, who did something as stupid as the stamp duty holiday, is now the Prime Minister, pretending the fuck that he cares about poor people. Absolute disgrace. So yeah, there needs to be a deflation of the housing market. The government needs to come out and build something like 500,000 social houses. Remove buy-to-let, tax capital gains, pop the bubble, and then really we just need some very, very clever people to somehow bring out something that can defend those people who need defending. Not the property speculators, but people who have one home, they live in it with their family, and now they're in massive negative equity. There needs to be something. Someone who understands economics more than me, bring up some kind of package that defends them, you know. And basically the banks, I think, have to take a big hit here, absorb a lot of that negative equity, because they knew what they were doing in 2020, 2021, when they were just selling mortgages to first-time buyers, 100% back, 100% mortgages and all this crap and everything. They knew exactly what was coming, because they're not fucking idiots. They knew that once this era of free pandemic money was over, interest rates were going to go up, and those people were going to be fucked. So, in the past, these people are dragged out and interact with lampposts and rope. But you can't do that now because we're civilized. But these people need to face prison, and their institutions need to basically be the ones taking on the burden of negative equity. I mean, we bailed them out in 2008, remember? The nurses, who haven't had a pay rise since then, bailed those fuckers out. So it's time they repaid the favour and bailed out all the negative equity that a housing price collapse would cause. But basically, you have to do that. You have to get housing prices back down to the relative wages, because you can't raise wages up. Wages are a bit low. It's a problem, but they need to come up a little bit. The amount they need to come up to match house price inflation would destroy government budgets. It would destroy most small businesses. It's just not viable. And that's not the problem. A small increase in wages to match the inflation in food and other things, fine. Taxes to stop the inflation in energy, fine. But house prices have to come down, and they have to come down fast and a lot. So, stop complaining to the Bank of England that it's basically trying to do its job, and complain to the governments that they have not been doing their job for 12 years. Okay? There you go. That was longer than I anticipated, but big subject.